Here?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Well, good morning and welcome. My name is Nicholas DiMancio. I am the current head of the Department of Architecture here at MIT, which we dearly hope will be your home for the next several years. And so this is an important beginning to sit down with you and welcome you here. You'll notice there are two people here. That is because my term as department head concludes July 1st of this year. And so by the time you come, my amazing colleague Anna Mayaczki, sitting to my left, will be the department head. So we thought it would be much more fun and much more appropriate to do this together. Anna, do you have any words of welcome?
I have many, but welcome. It's great to see you here. And I am grateful to be a guest in this open house so that you have a little preview and then we can play together next year.
Fantastic. So one thing I'm going to do also is to ask everyone who is here, who is the director of a group or a program or a faculty member for that matter, to also stand up and introduce themselves now. One very important part of our culture is that we all do this together as a team of students, staff, and faculty. So before you get the idea that any particular person's in charge, why don't we go ahead and have everyone else introduce themselves as well? I'm going to run around and with the mic because we have folks on Zoom who won't get to hear otherwise.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon Clifford. I'm currently directing the SMARCS program, but like all of our faculty, I'm heavily involved in the IMARC program as well. Happy to answer any questions you have today. Welcome.
Hey, folks. Great to see. Many of you I've met already via interviews, or we've talked a lot on the phone about you potentially joining us here. So great to see you in person. I'm William O'Brien Jr. I'm the director of the IMARC program. You'll hear from me in about 45 minutes where we share a lot about what we're up to, and really thrilled that you're here.
Hi, all. Excuse me, I got a cold. My name is Sheila Kennedy. I am a professor of architecture, and I teach Option Studios, and I co-direct the Odds and Mods program, which you'll be hearing about a little bit later. Really looking forward to chat at lunch, so come find me. I'm easy to spot. Welcome.
Hi, congratulations. I'm Yolande Daniels, Associate Professor, Director of the Architecture and Urbanism program, and I coordinate Core 3. That's the Integrated Building Design Studio. Should I pass it?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Congratulations. I'm Holly Samuelson. I'm an associate professor in building technology. Happy to talk to you about that and answer any questions.
Fantastic. So that's already a lot of people, and we will maybe talk a little bit to begin with about how this department distinguishes itself from every other department you're looking at. Maybe because it's good to get exercise putting your hands up because later on we'll want you to ask questions. So how many people are here for the MArch program? Almost all. How many people here are for the SMARCS program? And how many people are here looking into PhD? Okay, so it's MArch and SMARCS. What? SMBT? Oh, very good, very good. Sorry. Particular apologies to our SMBT students. And the how many people, you don't have to tell us but what school it is, but how many people are looking at other schools right now? Okay, very good. That is your right and your privilege, and we're going to tell you this morning not so much what makes MIT amazing, because it should be already clear that MIT is amazing, but what is actually distinct about this place so that you can have some intellectual leverage to make the choice. So it's not working. Could we get the slide? Maybe just hit the, Tessa, would you mind? I think this is not working, so. Uh, oh, it's playing from there.
To
I can
direct
just,
it at the.
okay, good. Okay, very good. So this is a letter. This is a very important letter because without this letter, we wouldn't be sitting here. This is a letter written by William Ware, who was the first head of our department, to the secretary of MIT, which was then forming as a trade school in Boston in the middle of the 19th century. And this was, is there a weird sound thing happening? No. Yeah, I'll just go ahead. William Ware wrote this letter saying that you fine gentlemen, and for better or for worse, it was gentlemen who were starting this trade school in Boston, should add a fourth course, a fourth department to mechanical and civil and mining engineering in architecture, because he argued at the time that design would help synthesize all the different studies of physics and geometry and different things that were going on at MIT, and everyone would benefit. And that is still very much the case today. What this resulted in was actually the very first school of architecture in North America, the very first bringing techniques of teaching from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, the study of historical objects. You can see some of the same plaster casts that you see in these photographs from when MIT was across the river in Boston are down the hall here to my left and have traveled with us. This begins the one way to look at our presentation today, which is a kind of tale of three buildings. I'm going to talk about two of the buildings initially, and I'll talk about the third building at the end, which is, of course, our new building. But this building, this studio building, first the Rogers building, and then the actually Pierce building to the left, was the first place where architecture was studied in a professional sense on this continent. And so this school has a very special relationship to the history of the architectural profession. And now it has a very special relationship to thinking about its future. So the second building is a building which really describes what we're doing here at MIT and how MIT has transformed. This is Building 20, which doesn't exist anymore. It was supposed to exist for 4 years. It ended up existing for 40 years. And it was a temporary building standing where the Stata Center is now, the Frank Gehry building, where almost everything you can think of that was invented at MIT at the 20th century was invented. The writer Stuart Brand wrote about this building in his book, How Buildings Learn, which he wrote here at MIT, to talk about what makes it a very distinctive creative environment. And this was a building originally built for the MIT's invention of an administration of the program to develop radar during the Second World War, which in turn transformed the research university into this dense collaborative place. And these temporary flexible buildings were very good for the invention of technical devices in the Second World War. And they stuck around for so long, not because they were special or beautiful, but because they continued to be great places to do that kind of work. And so MIT, as you know, really helped not just invent, but define what research is in the 20th century. And the invention, even in architecture, of things like CNC machines or CAD systems were all undertaken here at MIT. So what the department is today is really the intersection of those things. We could go through this is my perspective. I'm going to ask Anna for her perspective, but we are at once the foundation stone of the architectural profession in this place and in this time, and with a very particular responsibility and obligation to that profession. But we're also the place in the world, one of the places in the world that is most committed to invention and thinking about the future. And so we have a particular role in architecture schools, in the profession, in the landscape of the built environment more broadly, to think about and define not only what the profession has been, but what it's becoming. And that's my take. But what would you tell these fine people?
Well, let me first actually introduce myself a little bit more than as the future head. Yeah. I'm a historian, critic, curator of architecture, and I've been teaching both history theory and design at MIT for the last 19 years. And during that time, I have also directed the MArch program, directed the SMARCS program, directed the architecture and urbanism group, directed thesis, lots of things. So I've seen it all from the trenches in a variety of ways, and I've seen this event many times. So I thought it might be useful to give you a little bit of that. And maybe if you, now I'm directing the Critical Broadcasting Lab, and maybe some of you know the I Would Prefer Not To podcast series that I've been collaborating on with the Architectural League. And if not, well, we're in the 5th season, so please, if you're interested, check it out. I can tell you a few other things. I am born in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, in a time and place, or a place at a particular moment in time. And it has taken me 30 years to figure out or to articulate that there are certain ways that I've been disoriented in this world as a result of that, that some of them maybe come from English as a second language, which is a thing. And I'm with you if you're one of those of us. But more of it has to do with a certain sort of socialist upbringing that in this moment also means, in my opinion, that there are certain points of view and skill sets that come from it that might be of actual value in this current, difficult, violent, volatile moment that we inhabit. So if you're, as someone who has been part of the US academia for a long time, one of the ways that I imagine schools, any school, starts with really kind of thinking about the human material and other timelines that unfurl at different speeds to intersect consequentially in the aging walls of our buildings, in the labor and care protocols, in the pedagogies that we have, in collective and private political hopes, in our joys, heartaches. And then you add to that things like news that travel across the globe that we all kind of take in different ways and at different speeds. You think about architectural fashions that travel the same channels as political activism. You think about the kind of global events and climate crises that arrive to us in the form of black and red clouds that we all ingest, thereby connecting us to extractions, past and current here and elsewhere, and which makes us all a kind of carbon form, to follow Elisa Iturbe, if you know this term, in some way, connected, among other things. So if you can think school that way and you're currently thinking about decisions that you're making, for a second, I'll put a different hat on and say, if you have decisions to make, don't worry, there'll be whatever decision you make, it will be a good one. Every school is actually going to provide you with an amazing, most intense experience, a little moment in your life that will connect you to most important people for the rest of your life. So you can relax in a certain way. All schools in that sense are similar. We are all this kind of series of different timelines unfurling at the same or different speeds. But there are also specificities to those schools. And so in some sense, we are a lot like other schools, and then we're we're not like them. Maybe that's not a correct grammatical way to say it. But for us, there will be here specific people, specific spaces, and specific emphasis that you will encounter. We are an extremely intimate program. Maybe that you get a sense, or intimate program. So our MArch and our SMARCS are both bringing in 20 people every year. Our student to faculty ratio is phenomenal in some sense. We have been dedicated to supporting our students financially and through advice and guidance over the years. And hopefully some of these things are already clear to you from the different interviews and your letters, but we can certainly talk about them in more detail. We have been also dedicated to being on the edge, the pioneering edge of the discipline. This is a very particular edge, which means that we have certain ways of thinking about research that are different than at other schools. But we're also the oldest school of architecture in the US, which means that we have had the oldest history theory program, and it grounds us. It reminds us that this crisis is a lot like some other crises. that it's not a new thing, even though it may be extra and it's ours. It reminds us that at that pioneering edge, there lurks all kinds of delusions, and we have to be aware of those. We are also in the context of a technological institute, and you all know that this is the kind of brand that MIT carries with it, and it precedes us. But what's important about that, again, is that we have been with technology for 155 plus years, and we think of it as always already cultural, which is a very useful way to position ourselves when faced with lots of different kinds of technological optimism. So these are some of the important things that you'll find among those lines and timelines unfurling together. Then the department itself is organized in such a way that it supports research excellence, that we are inviting you to take part in with us, with our faculty. Maybe those are some of the key things. Maybe I can tell you, there's so much to be done. And join us in trying to do it. And then the second thing that's important is that if you come, you will see that we trust you with our future. Okay.
You're making me want to come to MIT. I think I would reinforce, I think, the sense that that Anna gave very poetically of MIT is somewhere on the edge of the possible, on the edge between today and tomorrow. It's a you may sometimes hear, and you may hear when you're talking to other schools, that not a lot of MIT students become architects, or like half MIT students become architects in the traditional sense, and this is not true of but when we actually, a couple of years ago, when we went through our accreditation process, with our team of staff, I said, well, let's get to the bottom of this. Let's actually look where everybody is who graduated, in the last 10 or 15 years, and what they're doing. And what we discovered was actually a very interesting, this is true of all research, that what you discover is actually very interesting and completely different from your expectations. Every single graduate of our MArch program was in architecture, with only one or two exceptions. But where they were was interesting. Many of them were, more than half of them were in distinguished firms or of some stripe or another, either their own firms or large firms that they were part of, were going to be partners into. But they were running the R&D labs, or doing the most experimental projects, or pushing the firm to the edge of a kind of researched future from within the discipline. Many, an equivalent number, about another quarter, were working, actually what gets called these days an entrepreneur, but I would say either a social entrepreneur or an entrepreneur in the more traditional sense with a startup, but working with and for the built environment, but just outside the profession, and a kind of penumbra of where the profession bleeds into where it is going to be and where it is going to need to be in the coming decades. And then the remainder were working in academia, in architecture as well, but teaching, researching on their own. And so in that sense, we prepare all of our students for careers in architecture, and all of our students become architects, but they become architects at the penumbra of the profession and its future, in I think a way that speaks powerfully to what this institution is. So a bit more about this presentation, which is rollicking along. We're not doing a sweeping survey of everything with 100 PowerPoint slides. You'll see a lot today. We are going to jump into a few sample activities that show you how the department works and the kinds of things that we do. I think that one of the ways in which we create the future is that knowledge itself evolves like its own kind of DNA. It's recombinant. And so we have expertise in the department, as you'll see, the world-leading program in building technology, the world-leading program in history and theory, a world-leading group of designers, a world-leading group of people studying the intersection between design and computation. And if we let all those people work separately, we'd never get anywhere. What the department is all about is figuring out how to push them together in new and unexpected combinations to get things done. So I'm actually really glad Sheila is here, but I'm a little bit nervous about presenting her work. I wanted to go and highlight actually this broader initiative of climate studios that Sheila Kennedy and Caitlin Mueller have helped pioneer in the department as a kind of research activity, and talk about it as a case study of the kind of things we're trying to do. And I'm actually delighted to say that based on, in large part, the success of their work, we were able to secure donations to start 2 more of these activities in the coming year. But basically, the idea is that the studio exists as a unit of architectural teaching all the way back to the 19th century. And of course, research exists as part of the fabric at MIT, but we have yet to fully take advantage of the capacity of the studio itself to do research. So the idea behind the Climate Studio is a 3-year, now extending to 4-year in the case of Odds and Mods program of research, which brings together expertise, in this case from building technology and design, to study, in this case also, material circularity in building materials. Sheila's going to correct me if I get it wrong, and some very interesting research that Caitlin is doing, especially around how machine learning and AI can help us build with non-standard and recycled materials to make a more circular economy. I think as a department, we take the larger climate crisis and the fact that building contributes both 40% of, or almost 40% of greenhouse gases through the construction operation of buildings, and the built-in environment is at the frontier of the effects of climate change. This is not even, this is just the oxygen versus the carbon dioxide of the department. And what we do with that and how we do it is the focus of conversations of these activities. So this is how the studio enterprise began, with a conversation in this room around a recycle table with all of our faculty contributing, which tells you, again, a lot about MIT. And then I'm just going to page through quickly some of the amazing work that was done this most recently in fall of 2025 in a beautiful studio named with typical precision as What Wood Wood. And again, that concluded, of course, with a conversation in this room. The next specific activity is related, and it's an exhibit called The Climate Objects that Anna and I co-curated with a recently graduated student, Calvin Zhang. And I'm going to go through a couple of those images from it while I invite Anna to describe what we did.
Yeah, so if you were with me about that description of the school, that means, you know, it, as a series of timelines and material, human, and other, then you might be already attuned to thinking about architecture similarly as a series of deeply knotted, complex relationships, always in process and always already discursive. And occasionally as a really consequential material reality that produces other realities. So with that in mind, and if you add a few sort of things that are part of your daily life already, the LED bulb that will last 10 years, or think about the electric car with lithium filled from somewhere else, or you know, casual plastic bottles, which there are none in this room, which is kind of amazing. There's so many things that surround us. Wherever you look, basically, you will see something that might be termed as climate thing, a situation that if you start to unroll and narrate, you will arrive to ways in which the things we do, the things we have, our practices contribute to and are part of climate crisis. So with that in mind, with this idea that climate is everywhere already, always, we were looking to the work of MIT Department of Architecture and a few friends around it to set up this exhibition, in which basically we invited work in progress to land on this sort of mechanics of what might be a lab or a research space. So more than 40 tables were supporting the work of faculty, studios, and some recent students. in the context of an exhibition that was called Next Earth, with our own portion of that being MIT climate work. So we wanted to, in the context of the Venice Biennale, which had a lot of different claims that it was making, offer something that is not so certain of itself, that is not completed, that is not yet a proposition, but that's full of possibilities. And together, this is the kind of figure of the department and its work on climate. Climate is the biggest topic of our moment. So it is everywhere, as I said. If you scratch anywhere, you arrive to climate. It might be a long or climate crisis. It might be a long trajectory or a short one, but it will be part of the world that we inhabit from now on, and how we respond to it is consequential.
So I think the exhibit, it was a really amazing, we're a small department, so to do something like this, took everyone, and it was an amazing collaboration. And but it gives you also a real sense of the way in which this very small, very intense place can also kind of change states suddenly and flip into an organization that addresses the whole world and shapes the larger discourse of architecture at a national and global level. And that's the real privilege of standing at the leverage point that we have here. I'm going to talk about another quite different activity we've undertaken in the last 5 or 6 years that will also continue and define part of your experience here. MIT has its own history, so we are one of the things we're actually most interested in here is thinking about the future of history, how we continue to shape and look at the history of our own institutions and use our history to imagine new ways that we ourselves can exist in the future. One of the most interesting historically related activities we've undertaken in the last 5 years has to do with the architects sitting at the very end of the studio here in the Rogers Building, and that's Robert Robertson Taylor, who was MIT's first Black graduate and the first Black architect accredited in the United States of America. And when he graduated, he could not get a job in architecture here in the Northeast, but after 2 years, he was hired by Booker T. Washington, and he built most of the campus of Tuskegee University in Alabama with the work of students based on the curriculum adapted from MIT. And so Tuskegee is kind of our sibling as a result, a similar curriculum, similar background, very different social and cultural context. And one of the most exciting things we've done in the last 6 years is build a series of links between the two institutions. This is a group of Tuskegee students with our faculty looking at Robert R. Taylor's thesis, which is an amazing thesis, one of the best of his year. And here's a group of our students doing a kind of work that we can't do here at MIT in historic preservation and analysis with the buildings of Robert R. Taylor in Tuskegee. So this is an exciting and an ongoing program. We'll have our first celebration of a Robert Taylor Day connecting the two institutions on April 10th. Now we get to the third building. This one I'm going to pitch over to Anna, but I'm just going to say, one of the most interesting things for me coming here 6 years ago as department head was to enter into this process, which was already underway with the architect selection of reimagining the next architectural chapter for this department and for the School of Architecture and Planning at MIT. And I didn't talk a lot about my own history, but one of my mentors and first employers was the architect of our building, Liz Diller. So it was, I entered into yet another kind of interesting collaborative relationship there for a building which I would say is its own kind of research on what the future of the spaces of teaching and learning architecture can and should be. And so that is a research question that all of you will help us answer. But I'm going to go back to my role as projectionist and hand it over to Anna, because Anna is really going to lead the process with all of you of figuring out who we are in this new place and time.
So as the images start, you will be visiting this, I think between at 1:30 and 2, depending on, please do visit it because I think it's an exciting space that we are going to inhabit very soon. So we have been working diligently on figuring out how to get consolidated, how to fit into this space, all of our different activities. And we are getting excited about the move itself. What I would like us all to think about as we do that is that it is an experiment for all of us. And I would like that to be, in fact, the kind of logic by which we inhabit this building forever, not only the first semester or the first 2 semesters, but that basically we need to set up in this next year a kind of relationship with this building that allows us to continuously experiment with our pedagogy and the building itself. It is an adaptive reuse building, so in some sense it is also signaling the kind of shift that I think is happening everywhere, with the center of the discipline moving slightly to those kinds of questions. What do we do with the built world that we are inheriting, and how do we steward it from now on? It will be full of, didactic lessons on that subject, like often you find in architecture buildings. The spaces that we will have here for working together and for gathering are amazing. They are, right now we're gathering in our best gathering space in the Department of MIT so far, and it happens to be one of the spaces that surrounds the hall made by the dome. So we've never here had enough of a kind of an address, a place where you go and you find people and you find the conversation. We are super excited that there will be spaces for that in the context of this new building. I am particularly excited about the crit space. So when you're review space. So when you're there, please look at it, imagine it. What this building will allow us to do is also make our thesis moment public in a way that we have not been able to do. We have been going to the Media Lab over the last few years, which has been wonderful and welcoming, but is not our space. Whereas here we will have stakes in the space in which we present our work. And I'm hoping we can also make it and present it to the rest of the world in a way that we haven't been able to do. So that's enough for now. Get excited when you see it, because that we will need that excitement to also establish that relationship to this building that will be one of permanent experimentation.
So I'm going to end the formal part of our presentation with a quote, which is actually only a few months after the letter that you saw at the very beginning. William Ware managed to convince Course 4. So everything in MIT is numbers and acronyms, but that's a kind of part of our military industrial heritage. But we are Course 4 at the undergraduate level. We were the 4th to be added. They're now up to 22 or 23 or something like that. But but in presenting in a public sense for the first time, the project of the new department at MIT, Ware said it's the aim of this school. And I'll note here, by school, he actually said MIT. So he was making this argument on behalf of MIT as a whole versus the School of Architecture and Planning, which didn't exist as an institutional designation until much later. So it's the aim of MIT, in fact, to do what it can in its day and generation to ensure that the architecture of the future shall be worthy of the future. And so sitting with all of you today, you are quintessentially the future of our department and also the future of our discipline and the future of the built environment. And we are a place dedicated to helping you imagine what that could and should be. And so with that, we actually will turn the conversation over to you. You all exercised your arms and raised them, and we are hoping to break down the formal and awkward barriers of this institutional situation to actually invite you to ask the questions, not that you think would either impress us or not embarrass you, but what is actually on your mind as you try and figure out what this place is and where it's going. So we will sit in awkward silence for a moment until someone helps us out. Thank you. Here,
Boston before. It's my first time coming to Boston and I'm not familiar with the campus. What would you say the connection to other schools or buildings throughout MIT is? And is it a campus that we walk around often as architecture students? Because I come from a school where we're pretty limited to our building, or is it more collaborative outside of MIT?
I can take it. I mean, right now we are part of an ensemble that lives around an infinite corridor. So in this current configuration, there was a lot of moving through many other things to be where you are. But it also meant that there were no edges to who we were. And so I do think that the building will change that because it will give us a location that is ours. But the hope is that, some of the urgencies of the moment are beyond the kind of disciplinary questions that we ask. We have to ask our friends in other disciplines to join us in reformulating the questions, right? So the hope is that they will come visit us in this new building because it's so awesome. And we have the table at which we want to have these conversations. So, but this question I think is probably also useful to pose to students because I think the students kind of crisscross and produce paths across MIT's offerings that are sometimes unimaginable to me, that are amazing. So you get to have the best time figuring out who you want to hear from and where they are. That's possible. And we have done a lot, and probably Liam will tell you, are you MArc or Smart? For SMARCS, we've done a lot, sorry, that situates this answer. We've done a lot to figure out a way to open up some space for you to do that even more than we have done it in the past. And for SMARCS, this is what we invite you to do.
Yeah, so Dan is actually asking one of the most fundamental questions about this point in the department's history, because when this group of buildings, so MIT moved across the river, it was coming up in the world, it made this impressive set piece to tell the wealthy Harvard people of the Back Bay that MIT had arrived with all of its columns, and when this original group of buildings was built, this shows you how architecture matters and representation matters. The instruction was that the lines between departments could only be dotted on the plans, that everything would flow into each other and we would create a space of collaboration, because MIT as a whole also creates innovation by combining ideas and combining disciplines across boundaries. But MIT, starting with the temporary buildings I showed you, almost immediately in the 20th century, started expanding far beyond this group. So MIT is now a much larger field in Cambridge, and the Metropolitan Warehouse building is actually in kind of the center of that field, depending on your perspective versus the edge. And then how we relate to each other across streets and buildings versus across corridors is something all of you will actually help us figure out as well. Other questions?
I was wondering if you could talk about opportunities to travel within the program, either during the studios or opportunities in the summer. Yeah.
I can take that one since I'm the one responsible right now for the travel budget. But so, buildings don't move and cities don't move, and we are students of buildings and cities. And so, particularly in the last couple of years, as the budget of every institution of higher education has to be justified and revised and reviewed, we've actually held on to travel as a key part of our student experience for the reason that it's very hard to engage architecture as a whole and as a discipline in any sense in its research and as a design student without travel. We have focused our travel on certain points in the curriculum. So generally every spring studio travels. Every spring.
Just come back.
What?
They've just come back. So when you talk to students,
yeah,
they've just traveled.
Yeah. So ask where they went, and then And then we also are very successful in taking advantage of a whole set of resources that MIT has for travel and placements during IAP, which is, again, everything is an acronym that stands for Independent Activities Period, which is the January term. But during the January month break and during the summer, our students have internships all over the world. And not only that, but they have support in finding firms and getting the visas from MIT as a larger infrastructure, which we benefit greatly from.
I mean, yeah, I just wanted to highlight one particular sort of way of doing that that's available to you individually. It is the MISTY program at MIT. There are various regions for MISTY, and it enables you to kind of invent the way that your travel will work. And it could be at a firm, but it could also be something else that MISTY will support. So it's very important to find those people quickly and start communicating with them. It matters if they know you. That is useful. But yeah.
Maybe it's kind of building on the first question a little bit. Given that we are in a town where there are several other institutions with design programs, what is the orientation of MIT's Department of Architecture to collaborating and working with those departments and institutions?
We have been, we have basically a cross registration set up with Harvard, and we think we're really great because we get many more Harvard students than our students go across. But that's also because the student body is very different, right? The sizes of these two student bodies are different. We support. There's been things that students do across the two institutions. And we are open to being at each other's events. You will see often critics from one place in the other among these two. We have much less formal sort of setups organized for other schools that are in the region, Northeastern or BU or BC. But they too are around, and this is where we draw our review critics from most often, the local ones.
Yeah, I mean, there are 7 architectural schools in Boston, which is, and Boston is, for those of you who don't know it, it's essentially the world's biggest college town, right? It and has an urban quality, but most of all, it has this kind of intellectual quality. And within Cambridge, as someone who didn't go to school in Cambridge, had not lived here, what I was most interested to learn is that, in fact, the relationship between the schools here, between Harvard and MIT, is really a sibling relationship, which it has, some of but those of you who have siblings know that often siblings are actually people who are quite similar, who define themselves as very different, who lean into the ways in which they appear to be different as a way to kind of hold on to their own identities. So both schools are great. Both schools are superficially quite different, less different than you would actually think if you scratch the surface, just like a brother and sister. And then both are able to actually have their own identities in relationship to the other, which is which is to say we exist as a larger intellectual community, and we draw from each other what we sometimes don't have ourselves, and our best moments. Like an event on criticism a couple of weeks ago, events that we did during the across the last 6 years, we actually collaborate on things which are interesting points of intersection between our interests. So you are actually gaining more than one school if you come to one of them, I guess is what I would say, and then
Come to this.
yeah, but yeah, I'm very happy that Harvard's here, and I'm very happy that I'm at MIT. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering about, can you talk a bit about opportunities to work with like local communities here in Boston, but also in other studios that bring students to elsewhere? like working with people outside the architecture school and the people that you're actually designing the space for?
I mean, so one of the things we benefit from enormously here in the school is our sister department of urban studies and planning, which in the 1930s, the course in urban design here started to become more separate. And by the 50s, DUSP, because everything's an acronym, became its own department. But we'll actually be together with DUSP in the Metropolitan Warehouse. And we work together closely with DUSP on joint urban design studios that often have a very specific focus of working with communities. So we work with, in recent years, there's been a lot of focus on everything from the role of data centers in communities to community farming to a lot of focus on, again, climate-related issues. And we do take care always when we're working with a community to develop a relationship across multiple years, and there's a lot of expertise in community collaboration within DUSP and within this department too. And I'd say one thing that we really don't do here is parachute in and leave, right? That's so we have ongoing relationships with community organizations like Eastie Farms in East Boston, communities in the South Bronx in New York that we come back to over time, and we try and leave more there than we take away.
I can add, but that's good.
Yeah.
Is that good for you? Okay.
Thank you so much. I honestly am less interested in architecture as a siloed, glorified object and more interested in the discipline as a system of systems, both that contain it and that embodies within it. I'm particularly questioning how an architect should be trained in contextual and urbanistic issues and discourse, and I'm wondering how you can speak more on this within MIT's pedagogy.
I mean, I'm with you. I hope you got that from my various sort of images that I was trying to paint, that, you know, we are object is occasionally what we produce, and sometimes it's important to consider it in terms of disciplinary logics that are at play. But we are so much more than the object itself, right? As a discipline. So in terms of urbanism, or maybe let's say that I would say that every studio that you would, this is an MArch question, yeah? Every studio that you would take would contextualize the question differently in a series of different sort of systems, as you suggested, in which it has to perform. And so this will go from maybe more disciplinary questions in the first semester to questions already in the city in the second semester. And currently that studio is collaborating with a local group around housing in Cambridge itself. We have done different things in that studio. We've collaborated with YMCA over the years. We've collaborated with the theater that we were refurbishing in one of the series of Core 2 studios. Then Core 3 will collaborate similarly with producers often. For a while, it was with producers of and indigenous populations in Maine, producers of seaweed. The last one has been working with people thinking about food in the context of South Boston and the seaport. So every time you jump to the next studio, you have a slightly differently angled set of questions. And some of the kind of collaboration is something that we set up. Some of it is actually your own appetite for thinking about that. We, in our rejigged curriculum, there's also now a particular space for urbanism to kind of connect to DUSP and to connect to city design and development, which is another kind of thing that happens at the intersection of DUSP and architecture in the context of our two departments. Maybe that's...
I'm just going to, we should wrap up our session now so you can go on to all the other exciting things we have for you today. But I would say it's a really perceptive question, Noor, because I think it was John Muir who said that when you when you pick up one thing and really look at it, you find the threads that connect it to the whole universe. And so, you know, the idea of the object is always very charged because it somehow denies the interconnectedness of everything. And as architects, we're always dealing with that dichotomy between building and system, building and ecology, building and universe. But really looking at things as interconnected in that way is a quintessential example of seeing things not as we would like to imagine them, but as they really are, and meeting them there and pushing on the world in that way. And I'd say that is a very defining quality of the identity of this department, of the nature of research as it's applied to building, and the nature of the work that you see from all of our students all the way through their time here and quintessentially in their thesis as well. So it's a great question to end on, and we'll end it there. And then I will invite. Let's see, where do we? Kateria, Tessa, do you want to explain to people where they're going next? So SMT, follow Holly. Smarks, follow Brandon. MARC, stay here, but get yourselves around one table here in the front table in the room. All right, thank you very much. We're so excited that you're here.
And we'll be here for lunch, so you can ask us more questions, harder ones maybe.
Yeah.
You.
All right, folks, we're going to get started. Just heard a little bit of a delay there. Hey, Mike, just had a quick question. I'm hearing myself like if you hear myself through the, it's just about turning this down. It's just about turning this down. I turn it off. And then when we show video, that won't be an issue.
Won't be an issue because you're broadcasting video through the Zoom meeting.
Great.
It'll come over the speakers.
Amazing. Okay.
Put this into. Good.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike.
You're on.
Yep. Awesome. Okay. Great to see you all. As I mentioned earlier, it's wild to finally see you in this space. Having looked closely at your work for 2 months and discussing you with the faculty, and then chatting with you all via interviews, chatting with a number of you on the phone. It's great to finally have you in this space. I'm going to go ahead and share some thoughts about the mechanics of the EMARC program with you. Maybe speak for 15, 20 minutes. And then I've invited a few folks who are teaching option studios to share what they've been up to as a way to give you a sense, just a small sense for the kinds of work, architecture, and research that goes on here. And then I've invited a couple of recent thesis students to share their work as well, to help you understand the kind of fluidity that really ultimately occurs between faculty research and student research. Although it might seem kind of far away at the moment, 3 years comes quickly and you're working on your thesis. And I wanted Mara and Agnes to show their work to give you a good picture of the kind of growth and development that can happen over those 3 years. So as has been mentioned by Anna and Nicholas, we are unique in the sense that we are made up of discipline groups. This, as I've shared with some of you already in conversations, this distinguishes us in the sense that each of these discipline groups, Aga Khan, computation, art, culture, technology, history, theory, criticism, building technology, and architecture and urbanism, all have dedicated faculty who have deep work, deep research in each of these areas. And that makes for a different culture here. It means that you can go to each of these discipline groups and understand the knowledge that they're building within each of these research areas. And what we've tried to do is lace together these discipline groups within our curriculum as a way to be in dialogue with and produce a rich conversation with the studio. So as you all know, this is a studio-centric program. You're going to be spending a lot of time in studio, and we're really interested in how these other courses thread through and connect with our studios. So just to give you a sense for our curriculum key that I'm going to be walking through, anytime you see a single color cell, that's a required course. And anytime you see a light gray flag, that means elective. And that matters because we have taken great care to think about our curriculum in terms of these two types of courses. On the one hand, aiming to give you the most robust and distilled set of courses that help you position yourself as a professional, as an architect, and then taking advantage of where we are at MIT to kind of hybridize that against what this institute has to offer. So you'll hear me referring back to that theme, this relationship between required courses and electives throughout. A really important way that we characterize our program is the way that you join us and the way that you leave us. We're really hoping that we can help you orient yourself here take advantage of what makes you unique, right? You're all coming from a very diverse set of backgrounds and educational experiences. How can we bring you together as a single cohort? Many of you have already heard me talk about how we try to teach at two scales, one at the scale of the cohort and one at the scale of the individual. And during your first semester and really your first year, we're really concerned with how we build the culture of that cohort. So this is the scaffold of our program. And you'll notice, it's a 3.5-year program. One kind of unusual thing perhaps is this thing at the end where you see our coursework tapering. This is not by accident. This is in order for you to be more focused around your final couple of semesters. I'll explain more about how that final bookend works. But it's also symbolic of the way that we are committed to teaching assistantships and research assistantships. So this is dedicated time and space for you to be actively pursuing teaching assistantships. And happy to chat more about that with any of you who are interested in that during lunch. We have a lot to say about that. So this first orientation bookend is really about how we carefully cultivate a culture that is unique to your cohort. And we're really interested in thinking about it in an expansive way, in the sense that we're trying to match up the way that we broadcast ourselves and the way that you understand your eventual experience here. So although you're already here, you're accepted, and we're kind of halfway through this orientation, gray box. Really, what's upcoming will help you orient yourself incredibly more. So for a few of you, maybe 30–40% of you, you might be involved in the pre-orientation workshop, which is the POW. And that's really to help those who don't have significant architecture background or studio experience to understand what studio culture is like and pick up some technical skills and understand fabrication tools. That's really exists as a kind of way to receive those of you who don't have a significant background. But then you're all experiencing the same 4 courses at the beginning. And if you didn't memorize all of the color codes, blue is computation, yellow is HTC, orange is building technology, and red is studio. On the other end, we're really keen to help you orient yourself to the outside world. So this second orientation bookend is really about how to help you become the best version of yourself, how to treat thesis and our professional practice as an opportunity for you to cultivate your intellectual project, but also your career trajectory at the same time. So the final semester is when you have professional practice and your thesis simultaneously, and that's by design. We feel like those 2 courses, one of which is a conceptual intellectual project, the other of which is something where you're thinking about, you're kind of appropriating an entrepreneurial spirit and saying, how can I make this intellectual project my life? And so we're really interested to have that final bookend be something that capitalizes on your unique interests and your unique research, ultimately, hopefully catapulting you into the career of your choice. As I've mentioned to some of you on the phone, our theses are incredibly varied, both in format, but also in value set and motivation. So we'll have a couple of theses that we'll share with you. But we're really, really committed to finding ways of bolstering your interests and having them take shape with through thesis and through allied discipline groups, whether it be building technology, computation, history, theory, criticism. So those give you a sense for the beginning and the end. And now I'll just speak about the kind of middle portion. So there are 18 required courses, and those required courses have been, over the last year or so, reconsidered in order so that they are more distilled, more robust, and which ultimately will allow us to give you more flexibility and more freedom, guided freedom, to make new kinds of architects, essentially hybridizing the way that we teach through the required courses, through the way that you experience the electives. I'll just say a few things about the studios. There are 3 core studios, which is distinct from other programs. We do our best to consolidate all of the kinds of exercises that we think will be important to providing you with a foundation in those 3 courses. And it was spoken a little bit about by Anna earlier, but we use those 3 courses as a way to kind of move you through increasingly rich and complex contexts within which your work will resonate. So if you decide to come, you'll encounter me first. I coordinate the first semester core studio, so I know quite a lot about that. We move through 4 different riddles, and those riddles are imagined to give you both access to what we're working on, but also pause to rethink again what it means to deal with, say, a figure or a 2D figure or a 3D object or a room or a building. And that semester is really important not only to begin to sort of rehearse how one deals with increasingly complex contexts, but it's also about starting a conversation across the 21 of you. So in that studio, there's a lot of focus on how we draw from each of your unique backgrounds in order to help cultivate your cohort's unique identity. During the second semester, which you'll have a short preview of later this afternoon, we're working on housing. That housing is right here in Cambridge. There are new rules to new building codes, essentially new zoning codes that are prompting really interesting ways of thinking about densification. And we're using our own backyard as a way to both think about those domestic/urban questions and social questions, but also we're using it as a way to think about how architecture is assembled. So looking at the residential scale and thinking how was architecture assembled previously, and how can we think about it in a progressive way going forward. And then thirdly, a studio that's been coordinated by Yolande in the past several years deals a lot with synthesis, different forms of synthesis, whether that be through construction materials, construction systems, environmental systems. And it's really the most sort of complex and layered studio. Some even call it a kind of integrated studio that occurs during the 3rd semester. That prepares you really for option studios, which happen over the next 3 semesters. So just really briefly about option studios, we have 3 of them. We imagine them to be 3 distinct opportunities where you can wear the hats of different pedagogues, different researchers, different architectural designers, practitioners. Most of the time we sample from here. Our instructors here are quite brilliant, and we want to expose them to you. Every once in a while, we do bring someone from the outside as a kind of addition to the sort of overall voice of the department. And you'll see every semester we curate a range of interests, a range of themes, and which range from things about fabrication all the way up to an urban scale. So a lot of thought that goes into the way that we curate those option studios. As I mentioned, there's a computation strand, which uses computation as a way to help you think about design and fabrication. And there's also a second course called Creative Computation. And for some reason, here we go, we're back. There's an HTC strand, which begins with a course taught by Anna Miljacki, which is about helping you think about positioning your own work vis-a-vis other lineages historically in architecture, followed by a course which is a sort of deep history in architecture, and then a new course that kind of crosses between urbanistic and historical themes. There's a building technology strand that deals with daylighting and environmental systems, followed by a course in structures, and then a course that's run by Caitlin Mueller, which dovetails with a lot of work that's going on in the third semester core about building envelopes and systems, etc. There is a new course that was referenced earlier. I'd love for you to chat with Rania about this over lunch. This is something she's spearheading, but it's a new course that will be continuing to be developed over the next several months in advance of your arrival. So these are the 18 required courses. And you'll notice that there is a zone above the pink and yellow that seems as though it's anticipating something, and that's for good reason. We are really keen to open up what it means to think about architecture here at MIT. And to that end, we've been working to restructure the curriculum in order so that there are a greater number of open electives. So just to give you a sense, I know it's small on the bottom right, but something that is characterizing our program is the way that open electives occur relative to other required courses at other peer programs. And you'll see MIT 21% of the entire units dedicated to this aspiration to hybridize between the way that we think about the profession and the way that we think about making new kinds of architects. There's thought that goes into how and when these electives occur. So as you move into the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth semester, there's a kind of increase as you hit the fifth semester. And this idea really stems for a goal to have increased agency, right? As you move through the program, as you start to understand what's possible here, and through mentorship and guidance, you're more attuned to being able to select electives that allow you to become a new kind of architect. And as you'll see, it might seem dizzying, but there's many different discipline groups and departments and so forth that you can choose from. This may be how it feels, but ultimately with some guidance and understanding that there are some that are working within the department, others that are working within the school, within the institute and beyond. We really imagine it to be a kind of active curation where each of you develop a sort of a kind of constellation, a unique constellation of electives that start to contribute to your identity uniquely as an architect. So, imagine with guidance, of course, navigating 7 open electives that help you tap into your emerging interests. And so you can imagine these as sort of a kind of blueprint, a kind of thumbprint rather, not a blueprint, a thumbprint, a sort of DNA for each of you that represents your interests and starts to contribute to a conversation across faculty, across students, and ultimately leading to 21 unique views on what constitutes architecture. This just gives you a sense for the different realms from which you will be guided to take electives, whether that be from the department, the School of Architecture and Planning, MIT, and then of course there is the ability to cross-register. And so here is your curriculum before it's activated in a sense. And then ultimately each of you will have some sort of building blocks that resemble something like this. So that's a bit on the mechanics of our curriculum. And what I'd love to do now is invite Roy to come up and tell us a bit about one of the option studios. We'll have 3 such presentations, and then I'm going to invite our recent thesis students to say a few words about their work. So Roy. And if you just speak in here, the folks on Zoom will hear you.
Okay, yeah,
Awesome.
I will. Hi, everyone. Let me put a timer here so that I don't go over time. Hi everyone. Welcome to MIT and congratulations for being accepted. My name is Roy Salgueiro. I'm an architect and urbanist from Spain and a lecturer here at the department. And yeah, this studio actually moves a little bit between the two domains of practice, architecture and urbanism. The studio that I'm teaching this spring is titled Territory as Interior, Post-Carbon Landscapes of the Eume River Basin. And it's in fact the second iteration of a studio that we started last year. Both of them, they do have like strong commonalities, thematic commonalities. They are focused on understanding how the design of buildings and urban spaces can help to bridge regional ecologies and economies. So here we study how to link the decarbonization of the building sector and economic revitalization. These studios are focused in Galicia and Spain. They connect research and design so that if you take it or a student taking it can define two fundamental aspects of the intervention. Both the program and the construction system are defined by each student. And ultimately, from an architectural point of view, we seek interventions that condense territorial relations into a single artifact, buildings that contribute to re-articulating and revitalizing the territories where we intervene. So last year, we worked in a former abandoned industrial building in the coast in Galicia. And students, they had to propose new economical activities that could happen here to revitalize the region where we intervened. And in order to do that, we did extensive resource mapping, understanding materials, energies, logistical systems, economies, and so on. The understanding of that allowed each student eventually, yes, to propose a series of programs that could happen in that abandoned and derelict building, all of them different productive activities, and also to understand the different construction systems that could go into this. So eventually we ended up doing models, which is the final outcome that we're also following this year, that speak very much about construction systems and as well the experience of that interior. These are studios that we run in collaboration with a foundation in Spain that is called Fundación RIA, which is run by David Chipperfield, the architect and Pritzker Prize winner. And in fact, we ended up showing their work in their headquarters. And it's as well quite connected to my own somehow research agenda. I'm particularly interested in the relationship that buildings maintain with those territories that provide us the materials and the energies and so on that we use, and how our responsibility is both with the construction, but also with the construction of these spaces, right? This is something that, yeah, we developed very much in the recent Spanish pavilion at the Venice Architectural Biennale, which generates a series of documents that are very, very close as well to the ones that we do in the studio, models. You see here, some of them, they have one material, but also the terrain, the territory from which this material is coming from. So in the current iteration of this studio, titled Post-Carbon Landscapes of the Eume River Basin, so we're investigating what you see here on this circle, right? This is an area in northwestern Spain that plays a crucial role in Spain's electricity network. It's one of the main nodes of electrical generation. This has happened fundamentally thanks to the finding on the region of lignite, a type of coal, that produced eventually a massive transformation of the space with the construction of what was Spain's biggest coal mine, open air, a huge transformation of the landscape, not only because of the mine itself, but also because of the dump, where the materials that were discarded went to. Of course, there were as well urban consequences, like the town of As Pontes, which we will see in the next slide if it goes. Let's see. Liam, this is stuck somehow on this slide. Let me. I know, but it seems that now it's a big delay. Yeah. Let me see if I can. Can I open the presentation again, perhaps? It happened to you once.
It's doing something with Zoom now, isn't it? So it's a Zoom thing.
Oh, it's a Zoom thing. Okay. Sorry, guys, we are experiencing a small connectivity problem.
Here we go. We're back.
We're back. Okay, let's.
And I think we have to share screen again. Yep.
We go to the presentation. Is that a PDF or is it PowerPoint?
It was a PDF. Let's see.
Okay, let's
Should
see
be
if
good.
it works now. Yes, here it is. No, so yes, like it produced those landscape transformations, but also, of course, like urban implications as well with the growth of this small town that we see here, fundamentally populated by people that were working in that mine. And also, of course, everything was somehow mediated, no, by a very big power plant, no, that was Spain's power plant, biggest power plant, populated by huge architectural elements, no. So that was Europe's tallest chimney. There was a 600 by 200 meters carbon park, which was like the biggest like covered surface in Spain. Cooling towers like measuring around 70 meters or 80 meters tall, and so on. So all that has closed now, and this is like the condition that we're now investigating. It closed after 47 years of history and has facilitated a series of ecological transformations, all of them quite positive. So there was like the former mine went into a lake. The former dump went into an area that has ecologically been restored and now has like a significant amount of biodiversity and forestry. But however, what we are somehow interrogating and investigating is that the space of the power plant itself hasn't like been considered. So all these buildings that we have been seeing are going to be like razed, demolished, and there are no clear ideas of what's going to happen there, right? So we are fundamentally asking something that people in the region curiously is not asking, which is what can be the urban transformation that accompany that process of ecological restoration, and how can new post-carbon economical activities help to drive the region's future. So to do that, we work, as I said, in the space of the former power plant, which is a quite big area, which obviously has a component of urban design as well. The process that we have been following with our 9 students, all of them very nice and very, very committed to the work, has been like first like to start a series of documents, no, that didn't exist before. We have been mapping the area, drawing the buildings, drawing the electrical systems, the infrastructures, the water system, and so on. These are documents that didn't exist before and that we do like a series of different scales, no, including increasingly bigger territorial scales that allow us like to understand the land uses, the coming together of industry together with forestry, agriculture, logisticals, and so on. And we actually end up zooming out, no, to understand like the broader territory where we're intervening, which is very, very connected along a river basin, no, the river basin of the Eume River. Here we have been seeing and investigating every type of land use that happens around. We have drawn them, but we have also like visited them in our current studio trip. We have been seeing, of course, like the importance of the water, but also like the importance of these energy systems, no, that are like driving the decarbonization process in the region, fundamentally wind, not only in terms of energy generation, but also like in terms of the production of the technologies themselves. We have like seen the water systems, both on their capacity of energy generation, but also like culturally. Other aspects that are like connected to primary sector, no, like grazing, like cattle, like forestry, and so on, no, and the ecological and cultural values of the region, no, so that students are actually starting like to think about programs that engage, no, with all these systems that we have been seeing, no, including like the culture itself. The analysis, of course, like includes as well understanding the buildings that, as I said, are planned to be demolished, but this is something that we're questioning by understanding what are like the potentials of these spaces that you see here on the image, some of them like highly valuable. And even if we acknowledge that some of them will be demolished, we of course like try to understand what is like the material bank, no, that we're obtaining from them, no, like different systems, concrete, like aluminum, steel, and so on. All of them materials, no, that should play like a role in a sort of a circular system to actually reconsider what can happen in this context. Based on all this analysis, now our students are actually starting like to develop like a series of projects. I'm gonna like quickly show some representative examples of different approaches. Together, all of them, they are actually trying to think post-carbon industrial and productive diversification. So instead of having a big industry here, there are like a different series of economical sectors working along several lines that the students like decided all together like to actually work on them. So the first one is strengthening the existing industrial ecosystem with training facilities. The second is creating a carbon heritage network with new cultural and tourist elements. Third, creating a renewable energy hub and democratizing the access to energy generation. The fourth one is developing the potential of the agricultural and forestry ecosystem. And the fifth is articulating the water, energy, and material circularity in metabolic flows. So starting with that last one, we have first like try to understand what buildings can be used again, and what do we get from the ones that are like demolished. One of our students, Nathaniel, is proposing the coming together of 3 metabolical commons, one of them dedicated to water, the other one to the metabolism of material, the last one to district energy, and each of them, like they engage with different spaces, reusing the river and revitalizing the river, which is now quite marginal, creating a space for this cleaning of the soil and the water, but also recycling material, and reusing some of the cooling towers as well to generate an energy hub. Another group of students is understanding the value of the electrical network to actually generate the future of the region by understanding the potentials that clean energy can have here, like especially the wind energy. They have been investigating this from an economical perspective, seeing the values that it can generate, the systems of governance involved in that process, to actually start like proposing a new energy hub, which takes like the building that will be demolished of the former power plant and understanding how we can reuse its foundations, material, etc., to generate a series of uses related to energy production. Third project analyzes the industrial ecosystem in the region, basically to say that there is a potential for light manufacturing instead of having a very, very big industry, understanding what type of light manufacturing can happen here, and reusing one of the conveyor belts to organize a series of smaller buildings that would house like these activities. Building on that, one of our students is actually seeing the relationship between industry and education, and is proposing a series of, like training facilities and spaces to create like a kind of a hub for new industries by reusing a series of warehouses that existed on the site. And finally, just like to show another possibility, Yanji is investigating the culture of festivals and also like experimental performances to see how we can reuse some of the towers as well, like to generate an experimental place for different type of productions, right? So what we're doing now is just like developing after the research, developing all these projects, like taking them into the phase of actually thinking how they will be built. And eventually we will reassemble this into a sort of a master plan, a vision for the entirety of the site. So that's it. Thank you so much, Leah.
Right. Thank you, Roy. Okay, I'd like to now play a short video. Skylar Tibbetts, who is also heavily involved in the SMARCS program, wanted you to see his recent option studio, so he generously agreed to make this video for you all. So we'll see if the sound works right.
Skylar Tibbetts, I'm faculty here in the Department of Architecture, and I'm teaching one of the option studios. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you. I'm in the SMARCS open house this morning, but I'll see everyone in the afternoon. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an intro on some of the option studios that I've taught in the past few years, and then a deeper dive into the one that I'm teaching this semester. So over the course of several years, I've taught a number of studios. One of them was with Hussein Chalayan, the fashion designer, and we taught a studio called Intelligent Skin. And this studio was really about students developing the next evolution of fashion and the next evolution of wearables, where it can adapt to your body, adapt to your environment, and students developed all sorts of fabrication, material, fashion-related prototypes and wearables, everything from CNC felting to TPU printed structures, etc. Then over the course of the past 3 years, I've taught a space architecture studio. And the first year we taught the studio around lunar habitats. The second year we taught it around low Earth orbit or space station zero gravity habitats. And then this year we're teaching it about extreme environments here on Earth. And this studio brought together Aero-Astro faculty, Jeff Hoffman, David Newman, Nicholas, our department head, and myself. And we taught a studio around extreme habitats on Earth, in low Earth orbit, on lunar habitats, and students fabricated structures underwater in the pool. They fabricated lightweight deployable structures. They had modular reconfigurable structures, inflatables, all sorts of different large-scale techniques. And this studio brought together engineers and architects and designers. We had undergrads, masters, SMARCs, as well as half the class was Aero-Astro. We took studio trips to Texas and went to NASA, went to SpaceX and Icon and many other places. And it was a really amazing studio for the students to be hands-on, not just imagining and rendering and dreaming, but actually building in the water, building under the pool, testing in the wind tunnel, testing on campus, building large-scale prototypes. And so this studio this year was really about designing for extreme environments. And I'm really passionate about in my lab's work, the self-assembly lab, how we build. This is an image from us building in Iceland. We have a lot of work in Iceland, a lot of work in the Maldives where we do field work, and we go out there and we build in quite extreme conditions. And I'm very interested in that, designing and building in the real environment at one-to-one scale with all the forces, the challenges of wind, weather, sun, rain, ocean, waves, and thinking about this not as models and concepts, but as real-world testing. And this studio is the first collaboration with Atelier Luma and the Luma Foundation in the south of France in Arles. And we have a 10-year partnership with them. So it's really combining our department and the Atelier Luma. Luma is an amazing place. We just got back from there last week for spring break. We took the whole class. And there's a contemporary art gallery. There's exhibitions and performances. There's a studio called Atelier Luma, which is who we're collaborating with for the studio. And so we over the course of the next 10 years are going to have many design studios together. We have research projects, educational innovation, all sorts of different opportunities to collaborate. And this studio is bringing together three main kind of ideologies. One is ISRU, in situ resource utilization, which really comes from the space world and space architecture domain, which is about how do you utilize the resources around you rather than bringing everything, or rather than imagining you have an endless supply. How do we actually be resource conscious and only be able to build with what we have in our immediate vicinity or that we can carry ourselves? The Atelier Luma side have an approach called bioregional design, where they're really interested in how do you design with only the resources in your bioregion. So not importing anything, you actually tap into the natural resources, whether that's salt harvesting or that's byproducts from invasive species or agricultural waste, etc. So we're bringing that together with the in situ resource utilization. And then from my lab, we have an ethos of building with nature, trying to tap into the natural forces in the environment, waves, wind, sun, gravity, etc., and utilize those as ways to build. So there's three phases of the studio. There's a research phase, which we've completed. There's a fabrication and testing phase, which we're completing this week. And then there's a field deployment and one-to-one construction phase, which will start next week. So in the research phase, we wanted students to understand the precedents of the landscape of quickly deployable, packable, lightweight structures. So how do people build on Earth today or build in other environments, extreme environments? What are the precedents in structures that are lightweight, they're packable, you can carry them in, carry them out, leave no trace, are quickly deployable? How do they respond to the elements, rain, wind, sun, etc.? And so students studied all different examples of that from different domains, different disciplines. The second phase we transitioned into students fabricating structures, so building materials, testing them, understanding their properties, fabricating and testing on campus. Each project, each student group had a different element that they're testing. Some are really focused on wind, some might be on UV, sun exposure, some temperature, water, different conditions. And then the third phase is about field work. And field work, as I was saying before, is really about bringing your structures into the field, testing them one-to-one, understanding the limitations, being humbled by nature, and working with those forces around us. We had the first example of that over spring break. We flew to south of France, and most people wouldn't imagine the south of France being extreme, but we had 60-mile-an-hour winds, and the students had to pack their structures, fly over with them, deploy the structures, and test them in the environment. The wind was so strong you could almost not stand up. And we had some that were testing microplastics and placing them in the water, so they had waders on and walking out into the water. Some that are about harnessing the salt extraction process and trying to build a sort of like salt fabricator with solar energy. Some are about kites and using wind energy to do weather and Earth observation data. And so we had students really testing in this quite extreme condition, learning from that. This is really the mid-review in a way, and then they'll come back. So the first phase of it was testing in coastal France, and the second phase is going to be testing in coastal New England, trying to understand the differences between the two environments, the similarities, and really get two shots at it. The first field deployment was in France, and the final field deployment will be here in Boston on an island called Kathleen Stone Island. And so that's a quick tour of the studio. Again, I'm sorry that I couldn't be there today, but I'll see everyone at lunch hopefully, and looking forward to talking more. Thanks so much.
Great. Showcase.
Hi, everyone. Are you hanging in there? Okay, great. I'm Sheila Kennedy. This is Caitlin Mueller. We're going to talk a little bit about odds and mods, which Nicholas introduced. And we'll go quickly through this, give you a little bit of background. But odds and mods is a new curriculum that's interdisciplinary that Caitlin and I had the opportunity to develop at MIT with other professors as a result of the Spoon Climate Studios. And it's really based on engaging new forms of computational thinking and computational design to be able to take irregular materials, whether those come from trash streams or from nature, and to be able to bring these into architecture to create new architectural and constructive building possibilities for materials that could not have been scaled a couple of years ago and have been kind of a block in terms of material circularity. You guys know this, it's going to be impacting your generation. The built environment is responsible for a lot of our global greenhouse gas emissions. And we each year have focused on a single material. In 2024, we visited brick factories. We looked at waste brick, which is very substantial. And we try to look at how materials that the mainstream might call subaltern or broken or discarded can actually become new supply chains for new forms of architecture and new forms of architectural practice. We use a technique that Caitlin will describe where we're using 3D scanning of these broken materials, which gives us a very precise three-dimensional understanding of them. And then we characterize them using matching algorithms. And central to our ethos is that it's very important in our pedagogy to get outside of MIT, to learn from manufacturers, to learn from communities, to learn from a wide range of different voices, so that we can test, or really so that you guys can test, and odds and mods can test ideas in research and create new forms and formats for practice. So for example, in the Brick Studio, we worked with an indigenous farming community just outside of Mexico City. And a group of students then built a prototype. So we're all about going back into the community where these resources are and Hopefully this will not be stuck as well. Perhaps. I'll keep talking. A group of students from this studio decided to get together and create a course in odds and mods where they were able to build a communal cooking station, a traditional Mexican fogón that supports food sovereignty and a culture of the Nahuatl people. You see that there. In 2025, we did Wildwood. Caitlin?
Yes, so in 2025 and also in this year, we've shifted our focus to wood as a material stream, which of course comes from forests and also waste streams, but which we tend to consider in a really standardized way. I'm sorry, my slides aren't advancing, but first we see this forest that we visited with students last year in Northern California. This is the Berkeley Research Forest, where we worked with forestry experts and understood sort of traditional and indigenous forestry practices, but also the contemporary condition in which actually we have too much wood in most forests and it's uneconomical to remove it. It needs to be removed for forest fire resilience, and yet there's no market for most of the wood in the forest. And so we tasked our students to learn more about these processes from forest all the way through construction and identify new ways that we can upcycle or upvalue or valorize these unwanted and waste materials and turn them into something amazing at the architectural scale. This is us visiting a sawmill with wood burned from the Caldor fire in Tahoe. One of the ways one of the projects within this thematic that Sheila and I worked on with several students at MIT is this new form of building structure that uses trees in a very minimally processed way. We use trees with their branching elements as the main building structure for a multi-story building, which takes advantage of the sort of natural strength that trees have, not in standardized rectangles, but through their organic nature, they have much more load carrying capacity than we normally expect of them. And we also can create new forms of architecture. So this was a piece that we tested both at model scale and full scale at the Venice Biennale last year, which started again with this digitalization process, working with foresters, collecting information about available materials, storing them as a digital twin, and working with these kind of emerging computational processes that we're inventing here at MIT to match this available inventory to a design concept. So we're thinking about geometry, material properties, structural behavior, spatial implications, architecture, all in this kind of integrated platform that brings materials into our system and also helps us get them back out so that we can start to construct at full scale. And this is just a diagram showing how we're integrating structural engineering, geometry, fabrication, spatial aesthetic thinking, all in sort of this one approach that culminated in this large piece, which showcases a kind of new way to think about architecture and forestry. In our studio this year, we're also expanding to other forms of waste wood, not only virgin cut trees from the forest that have low value, but also the enormous amount of waste that is generated everywhere in the supply chain of milling, transportation, assembly on site, deconstruction, demolition. The world is littered with this type of wood, which is usually burned, which releases all the carbon locked up in the cellulose back into the atmosphere and undermines the entire purpose of using wood, right, to harness the carbon. It's hard to use this irregular wood. That's why we call this odds and mods, because we're dealing with these odular and modular materials that are tricky to work with. They have variable geometry, they have variable material properties. Our hypothesis is that we can start to use digital technologies to make sense of this irregularity and start to design across it and within it at scale. And so we have these processes that we've developed in our research that relate to identifying available materials, bringing them into the computer, kind of characterizing them into what we call a fixed length vector, a parameterized design component, and then playfully figuring out how we can reassemble them, understanding them not only as material assemblies, but structures. We try to make everything structural. How do we take all these parts and turn them into new architecture? In our work in forestry, that's really taken a full supply chain view. So we're not only looking at sort of a material as is, but we're asking, where did it come from? How much of it exists? How can I start to operate across this supply chain? How can I disrupt waste? How can I redivert it? How can I imagine new products and architectures that come from this waste? This example is called Dow laminated timber, which is an existing product. It's an alternative mass timber to CLT. It doesn't use any glue, so it's a lot easier to reuse all of the parts, but it requires really long straight elements in order to assemble. It's a one-way structural system to make floors. We imagine an alternative version of this Dow laminated timber, which I think we'll show in a second. here, which uses scrap wood, like that pile that I showed you. It's hard to take a lot of little pieces and connect them together to make a structure because it requires connectivity between all of the parts. But by really carefully designing and optimizing in our computational system the locations of the dowels and the joints relative to each other, we can end up designing and testing and physically testing a system that performs as a load-carrying element just as well as the existing parts, and also really uses the heterogeneity of the inventory to imagine new forms of space and new forms of expression that reflect this inventory.
Great. One of you or some of you had on your minds what happens with travel. Do MIT students get a chance to travel? So we'll just take you a quick peek into our recent trip to France, which we are calling the Tour du Bois, or the Unwanted Wood tour. Our students are here. Here we are in front of the Pont de Garde. We had great timing. We arrived in France at the French National Forestry Day. So we had the opportunity to speak with officers from the French National Forests, and also to hike, to get out into nature and into these particular species, Aleppo pines, that characterize the area. And so Christina, in her project, which is called In a Moment, was looking at how to reimagine a moment frame instead of having a big glue laminated member that is very costly and specific to make. She was looking at how the small oak families, pin oak, turkey oak, black oak, and so forth, could be utilized. So we began our research here locally in New England, and she is looking at some of the defects in oak and some of their characteristics that make these thin oaks an unwanted wood species. And she's hypothesizing here that that these logs can be cut and characterized to make a new kind of moment connection that could be a little bit between a joist and a framing element, so that we can have a different kind of frequency. We can move that into form. And you can see that she's prototyping this down in our shop, and it looks like she's going to pick that up at 9 a.m. So we're making full-scale prototypes at the same time as we're thinking about forms. Harrison's project really wanted to look at dugong bracket construction from the Song dynasty in China. And he was looking at the invasive species of tree of heaven. It's all over the world. As you can see, it's in our area. It's also in France. So it's a great candidate for this. And you can see the brackets there of that system. So what Harrison was imagining was a set of parts that could use scarf joints, that could use dados, that could come together to produce a very large span, a very large public hall, using very, very short pieces of wood, which are characterized by the tree of heaven tree, which of course is super unwanted. Nobody wants the tree of heaven a tree. It's all over the world. So his future office has a free material supply. Everyone is paying to harvest this, take it off of railway tracks and so forth. And he has a strategy for that. Okay. This is Monsieur Jérémy. He's the mayor of Boulbon, which is a small town that we visited. And we ask students to use models and to figure out how to talk to people outside of architecture. It's a really good idea in practice to begin to be able to talk to local officials, folks who are not necessarily architects, craftspeople, and so forth. And you can see Harrison right here showing his project to Jérémy, Monsieur Jérémy, and the mayor was writing everything down. They have a competition that's going on right now to valorize their wood, and they're looking to make a hall. So these student projects are kind of like in the first line of this. We also visited huge scrap yards where there were ancient timbers from 300 and 400 years ago that are just being stockpiled. And that was sort of interest to Nermine. She started by looking at Franco Albini's lightweight shelf system, which is a compressive structure, and also looking at black locust, which, like Aleppo pine in France, is very branchy. It propagates in many different ways. And so its trunks and branches are quite short, producing this short kind of lumber. Okay. Yeah, maybe. I'm so sorry about that, you guys. There was an exhibit at MIT a few years back called "It Was Working 15 Years Ago," 5 minutes ago. And it reminds me of that. But we're going to reboot this. Is it? What is it?
It's that the presentation is going through Zoom. Sorry about that.
It's my fault. Yeah, so it was like working 15 minutes ago, but hopefully it will work now. There we go. So she is looking at these, how to reimagine these very heavy compressive structures, how they can be made out of small pieces of local wood and materials like marine chain or rope. And you can see her study there on the left for her prototype, and she's imagining a new kind of resource for local wood for its storage, seasoning, and drying without use of kilns. And it's incredible the kind of technology that we saw in France. It's very high-low, hybridized. On the one hand, you have people like Matteo here, who is a medieval carpenter. He's using an adze, which is not made today. It's a tool that was specially made for the reconstruction of Notre Dame. And then he also uses a wood miser, like the image that you see there on the right. So there's this hybridization of kind of low and high tech that's going on in the area. And then in Grenoble, we were treated to an amazing, almost dystopian factory where robots are being used to sort wood, as you can see. And every day they sort out over 100 tons of wood. So these will be, this sorted wood will be the material for this new form of building. Last project is Yuki's. He was imagining an arch made out of multiple pieces of construction waste that could be organized by the factory in Lely. You can see some views of it. He is looking at manipulating the structure to produce interior and exterior spaces. And also beginning to shift the elements so that he can bring in natural light. I'll let Caitlin close us out here.
Yeah, so as we continue this work, it's been super interesting to operate between the design studio and the research lab. And we're really excited about the next phase of this work, which is partially funded by MIT's Initiative for New Manufacturing, which we've convinced them that buildings and construction are absolutely part of new manufacturing. And so Sheila and I and others are setting up a new microfactory space on a satellite campus that MIT has in Middleton, Massachusetts, called the Bates Research Campus, which is a former linear accelerator for nuclear science that we're reimagining as a place to prototype new forms of construction with circular and unwanted materials. This is just a view of our space. So we're trying to bring the kind of speculative and research-oriented ideas of technology and robotics and computation into a very practical and real space where we develop new ideas that can translate with our industrial partners into reality. And we're excited for you to join us in that process.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Our emails are here in chat. We'd love to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila and Caitlin. I'd like to invite Mara or Agnes, would you like to start? Yeah, we're going to have two of our recent thesis students present to you to give you just a glimpse of what we're up to in the thesis. And Agnes will kick us off.
I'm gonna hopefully go a little quick. I know we're short of time. Hi, I'm Agnes. I just graduated from the MArch in December. So this is pretty fresh for me. And my thesis title was Natural Active Textiles, Computational Knitting to Enhance Material Intelligence. And my research question was, how can we replace synthetics in design systems? Ooh, there is a delay. Yeah, we could talk about this for ages. Okay, so my work is really rooted in the climate crisis. There's an accelerating kind of heating of the planet, as well as like a lot of unpredictable weather. And this is really going to shape the different bioregions across the globe. So this was kind of the research context that I've been motivated since the start of MIT by. Okay, yeah, let's do this. So my angle into this has been through textiles and material interfaces. I worked in textiles before coming to MIT. And so before concrete, steel, and plastics, humans were engineering fibers into complex structures that could protect, comfort, and adapt. And as you can see here, this is across kind of the globe in different regions. And you may ask, like, why textiles and why in an architecture school? Well, kind of textiles have an amazing kind of manipulation ability that you can kind of work from the fiber level all the way to the system level, and you can change the property of the interface just by working kind of in different designs of these. Next thing. So, and again, why textiles in architecture school? I kind of believe that buildings and spaces are just bodies at different magnitudes, both requiring protection, adaptation, and comfort through intelligent material interfaces. And my approach to architecture is kind of thinking about we need to redesign not just the buildings, but kind of the objects that we also live around. So I see a lot more of like kind of working between the scales as an important way of being an architect. So my contribution during this thesis, which I maybe have a bit more of a research focused thesis than a kind of practice focused thesis, is because I am a research assistant in the self-assembly lab. I have been for 3 years. So my work has been quite dominated by or quite led by kind of Skylar Tibbitz's research. And so I was really looking about how computational knitting could also combine with natural materials to create high performance textiles, which is an area that actually, as you may know, there's quite a few faculty at MIT who work on computational knitting. So it's also an area of research. And for those who don't know what computational knitting is, this is a flatbed industrial machine. It's a type of CNC digital fabrication that can basically design fabrics that have very kind of technical properties. So this means you can start to manipulate every stitch to design kind of what the fabric does. And this, in computational textiles, you can kind of work between structures, which is the little stitches you design, to the pattern, to the materials coming in to create kind of like really engineered surfaces. And as I said before, I've been really thinking about how kind of bioregions, I've been working with Atelier Luma as well for my thesis. So I've been working in collaboration with them and thinking about how do you have materials from different locations. This is led because if you think about kind of evolutionary optimization, natural fibers have had millions and millions of years of R&D. You can see this kind of wool on the left, which shows how engineered it is, and then to the plastics that we live around today. And this is kind of shown in how natural fibers kind of have amazing different properties. To riff on what Liam was saying about the cross-curricular stuff, I have taken a lot of classes in material science whilst I was here. So I've really tried to like kind of step into other disciplines to like basically make my research more, I would say, like backed up. So for my thesis, I did 2 case studies. And again, it was a little bit different from a building. I started my thesis, we do thesis prep, which starts in January. So if you treat your thesis as it's technically only 1 semester, but if you start in January, you can have a whole year. And I did 2 case studies. One was a large-scale architectural shading screen, which was computationally knitted from regenerated wood. And the second was with Atelier Luma and Self-Assembly Lab, which is this kind of prototypical natural material jacket. So in case study 1, I was looking about how you can start to use kind of designed architectural textiles to cool and ventilate cities. So how can natural fiber systems be used to cool our environments? As you know, if you've lived in the Northeast or other cities, it's very hot in summer. This is both across Europe, but also in kind of the East Coast, West Coast. But there's also, due to the climate crisis, increased kind of unpredictability in weather. So you're going to have more rain and more heat. And thinking about how can we retrofit our cities with kind of accessible and kind of like clever strategies. So I was knitting. I also took part in a lot of residences during my time at MIT. So I was on a design residency in the Netherlands during spring break, where I knitted this large scale architectural piece. And it was basically looking at how fibers can start to hold water. So this is 100% biomaterials. It's hydrophilic and hydrophobic yarns coming together, looking at how you can start to have kind of water landing on surfaces. It was chosen to be in the Venice Biennale last year. So this was basically the Venice Biennale is a large-scale architectural exhibition in Venice. It happens every 2 years, and this was looking at how you could start to basically go from regenerated wood all the way to a large-scale architectural shading piece. And yes, that was the culmination of that project. The second was so as Skylar said in his message, we've got an ongoing project with Atelier Luma, and that is my project I'm leading. I am now working for Skylar full-time, so this is kind of my thesis is just continuing, which is really nice. But it was basically looking at how you can start to have natural materials used in outdoor gear, which doesn't sound very architectural, but I think that's why it's good to show that you can kind of work between scales. And in the lab, it really focuses computation. So this is basically how you program the knitting machine. And I was very interested in how you can use computation plus natural materials to create design objects. So the way it works is you can start to program kind of this machine to make different structures, which end up looking like this. So you can start to have kind of textiles that have different properties just by programs. And my thesis kind of culminated in this jacket, which is a kind of like 100% biomaterial adaptive prototype. And then one of the nice things at the end of the MArch is you do a thesis day, which is a real, I think it's a celebration of everyone's work, and it's an amazing kind of show of what you've been up to for 3.5 years and what you've been thinking about. So yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Agnes. And then finally, we'll hear from Mara, who will also share her thesis work as well. Take your time.
Hi, everyone. Okay. Hi, I'm Mara. This is my thesis titled Seeing in the Saw. It's relatively hot off the presses. I also defended this past fall. And it was advised by Carrie Norman and JG. And it began with a series of objects, which I called trinkets. Trinket being related to the word trick and meaning a kind of difficult or elusive objects, there are many more than this. And I produced many, many of them during my time at MIT. And the thesis sort of ended up being, and there were sort of some nascent and perhaps unarticulated attitudes within these, I thought, about surface, joint, and grain. And the thesis eventually ended up becoming this book, which I can send around. Other different ambitions, which I'm told is normal. And the book ended up being a kind of attempt to excavate and cohere my own simultaneous fascination and almost revulsion at the saw as a tool and its kind of effects on material and on architecture, and ultimately articulate a set of attitudes about abstraction and articulation in our discipline as mediated by these cutting tools. So as we know, matter doesn't stay still. This is something we're very familiar with in architecture. It shimmies and rides with the seasons, and grain is a name for these currents and churns. You can think of lace-like layers in xylem in wood, or the crystal in strata in stone, or wool in a sweater, or fibers in a muscle, or the strands of air in a gust of wind. Grain itself is a very capacious term, so it means simultaneously the structure of material that remains invisible to us, as well as, importantly, the patterns that appear on the surface of material by which it reveals itself to us. So this doubleness of grain was kind of interesting to me, the fact that it is both signifier and signified, that it's strung between body and skin, opacity and nudity, tectonics and graphics, and that those two senses of grain, as visible and invisible, are tethered and mediated by the cut. And the cut to me is a kind of important cultural technique that orders and inflects our relationship to the world. In our discipline in particular, it's cuts all the way down. A sharp blade is strung between the corporeal and the ephemeral. The body itself is solid, but the edge is on the brink of disappearing, which is what allows the blade to wedge itself among matter and split it. All blades, knives, chisels, planes, axes, adzes, prefer to rive, to follow grain, which means that someone who wields a knife must know the matter at hand very well, contort their body in reverent negotiation with grain, and their skill lay in the care with which they perform that negotiation. The saw uproots this paradigm. The advent of serration, of teeth, cutting teeth, allows the saw to plow into matter. It is engineered for agnosticism to grain, and it releases the sawyer from each log's specificity. With the knife, it had been necessary to whittle one's way to the desired form, but the saw allows us to wrest crisp and crystalline forms from rippling and restless matter, and the proliferation of orthogonality that this allows enables a very different scale of agency in architecture. It enables flushness, which promises the comfort of predictability and control. But the price we pay for this is that the worker's body, which was previously beholden to grain, is now beholden to the planarity that is demanded by the saw. In pursuit of this comfort, and I think inebriated by the irreverence towards matter's temper that the saw allowed, saws have been plunged into some of our world's largest beings and opened up a universe of scale, and this kind of exploitation opened up a universe of scale and form and of surfaces and images, and grain became, in this moment, legible and didactic. The next chapter is a kind of strange interlude into anatomy, which is a discipline that's kindred to ours and its fraught and fruitful relationship to the cut. I'll kind of skip through this, but it kind of boils down to a discussion that took place in the 1800s between dissection and cross-section as two primary ways to understand a body by a knife or a saw along the grain or across the grain, where the ensuing discussion about which is the better way to know a body, with a knife or with a saw, along grain or across grain, underscored the enmeshment between cutting and knowing and seeing, and to which we owe very much in our discipline, and our own dependence on the effacement of labor in order to remain compelled by the magic of the saw's clarity, which we see on the right. And saw and clarity, as we perhaps already know, its flatness, flushness, and crispness are fundamentally unstable. Its maintenance requires dressing, which is a word that means both to clothe and to strip, to grind and sand and make flat again in this context. Dressing, importantly, is self-effacing. Skill in this case lay in making it seem like we were never there. This ethic of clarity through effacement has fueled, and this brings us back to architecture, obsessions with detail. How should labor be indexed? How should material be rendered? How should precarity be expressed, if at all? And here two schools of thought emerge. And the thesis sort of concludes in a discussion of these schools of thought. So on the one hand, abstract detail is aphoristic, elusive, and self-effacing. It makes its own tectonics disappear. The perversity of this condition, of course, is that the abstract detail forgets the labor that sutured it together and ignores the entropy that it will eventually rattle it apart. And its magic, like that of the saw in sections, is that it lets us momentarily delight in the attempt to trick us, and to enjoy our own fallibility and to forget its eventual demise. Articulated detail, on the other hand, is prosaic, perfusive, and didactic. It enunciates the labor that produced it. A populist desire of matter-of-factness and transparency, alongside a persistent, anxious individuation of members and layers, underpin its tectonics. Its history is thoroughly communicated, and its future seems soberly anticipated. But neither of these seems quite right to me. The solemnity of abstraction and the anxiety of articulation are both ways to negotiate the saw's episteme, but neither seems to address it quite head-on. And so the thesis ends in a question. Is it possible to refuse the choice between feigned honesty and demure duplicity? Is it possible to have both earnestness and magic? Thank you.